The Valeth Concord had watched humanity for a very long time. For 300 years, the coalition of 12 alien species had observed the strange creatures from the small blue planet called Earth. They had watched humans fight their wars. They had watched humans build their cities. They had watched humans reach for the stars with primitive rockets and hopeful dreams. The Concord had seen many young species before. Most of them died. They destroyed themselves with weapons or pollution or simple stupidity. The ones that survived usually became quiet and peaceful. They learned their place in the galaxy. They accepted that older and wiser species knew better. Humanity had not died. But humanity had also not become quiet. In 3 centuries, humans had spread to 17 colony worlds. They had built ships that were crude but effective. They had fought wars against each other, and somehow always survived. They were loud and messy and completely unpredictable. The High Assembly of the Concord had finally decided it was time to do something about the human problem. Ambassador Keth Voran received the assignment on a warm morning on his homeworld. He was a Scythani, a serpentine creature with scales that changed color based on his emotions. For 200 years, he had served the Concord as its finest diplomat. He had ended wars. He had created alliances. He had convinced species that hated each other for thousands of years to share the same table. The human assignment should have been simple. You will bring them the Articles of Integration, the High Assembly told him. They will join the Concord as a minor member species. Probationary status, limited voting rights, restricted military capacity. This is generous. Keth Voran had agreed. It was generous. Most young species received far worse terms. He assembled a delegation of 47 representatives from across the Concord. There were tall, thin creatures made of living crystal. There were beings of pure energy contained in mechanical shells. There were feathered humanoids and tentacled swimmers and things that had no names in any human language. They boarded the ceremonial vessel called Harmony's Light and set course for Sol system. The journey took 3 weeks. During that time, Keth Voran studied everything the Concord knew about humanity. He watched recordings of their history. He read translations of their literature. He tried to understand their strange customs and stranger emotions. The more he learned, the more confused he became. Humans were violent. That was clear. They had fought countless wars against each other over land, resources, ideas, and sometimes nothing at all. They had invented weapons of terrible destruction and used them on their own kind. But humans were also kind. They built hospitals and schools. They created art that made Keth Voran feel things his translation implant could not name. They loved their children with a fierce protective instinct that reminded him of the most devoted species in the galaxy. They were a contradiction, a puzzle wrapped in flesh and bone. Keth Voran decided he would solve this puzzle. He would bring humanity into the Concord and help them become civilized. It would be his greatest achievement. Harmony's Light dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Sol system. The ship's sensors immediately began scanning the area. Keth Voran stood on the bridge and looked at the distant yellow star that humans called their Sunday. "Begin broadcasting our arrival message," he ordered. "Use all standard frequencies. Let them know we come in peace." The communications officer obeyed. The message went out in 17 different languages, translated into human speech patterns by the most advanced computers in the Concord. Then they waited. 1 hour passed. No response. 2 hours. Nothing. Keth Voran's scales began to shift from calm blue to irritated orange. He had expected many things from humanity. He had not expected rudeness. "Perhaps their communication systems cannot detect our signal," suggested one of the Morthkai delegates, a crystalline being who spoke in musical tones. "They are a primitive species. Perhaps they are simply slow," said another delegate, a Ravine whose forearms crossed in a gesture of impatience. "Humans have short lives. Perhaps they think slowly as well." Keth Voran was not sure. Something felt wrong. He had dealt with primitive species before. They usually responded with excitement or fear or curiosity. They did not respond with silence. 4 hours passed. 5. 6. The delegates began to murmur among themselves. Some were annoyed. Some were bored. A few suggested turning back and reporting that humanity was not worth the Concord's time. Keth Voran was about to agree when the sensors screamed. Every alarm on the ship activated at once. Red lights flashed across the bridge. The crew scrambled to their stations, their voices rising in panic and confusion. "What is happening?" Keth Voran demanded. The sensor officer stared at his display. His scales had gone completely white. a color that meant absolute terror. Something is coming. Ambassador. Something. Large. Show me. The main view screen activated. At first, Kethvaran saw nothing but stars. Then a shadow passed across the distant sun, blocking its light for just a moment. Then the ship emerged from the darkness. Kethvaran had seen many vessels in his long life. He had seen the great carrier fleets of the Kethmar hegemony. He had seen the moon-sized habitats of the drifter clans. He had seen ships of war and ships of peace and ships that defied description. He had never seen anything like this. The human warship was 12 kilometers long. Its hull was angular and black, made of metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Weapon arrays covered every surface, bristling like the spines of some angry predator. The ship did not look like it had been designed by engineers. It looked like it had been forged by something that wanted the universe to be afraid. Kethvaran's scales went from white to a color that had no name. His body did not have a word for what he was feeling. His mind could not process what he was seeing. "That is impossible," whispered the Morthkai delegate. "No species builds ships that large. The resources alone would require." "They built it," Kethvaran said quietly. "The humans built it." The warship came closer. It moved slowly, deliberately, like a predator that knew its prey had nowhere to run. Its shadow fell across Harmony's light, and for a terrible moment, Kethvaran felt like a small creature being examined by something vast and hungry. A communication signal beeped. "They are hailing us," the communications officer reported. His voice was shaking. "Put it through." The view screen changed. A human face appeared, belonging to a female with gray hair and dark eyes. She wore a simple uniform without decoration. Her expression was calm, almost bored. "Valith Concord vessel," she said. "This is Admiral Yuki Tanaka of the United Earth Navy warship Prometheus. You have entered sovereign human space without authorization. State your intentions." Kethvaran tried to speak. His throat had gone dry. 200 years of diplomatic training seemed to vanish from his mind. We come in peace," he finally managed. "We bring greetings from the Valith Concord. We wish to discuss integration." "Integration." The Admiral's voice did not change. Her eyes did not blink. "I see. Stand by." The screen went dark. Kethvaran turned to his fellow delegates. They stared back at him with expressions of shock and fear and disbelief. "What manner of species have we found?" whispered the Ravine delegate. Kethvaran did not have an answer. He looked out the viewport at the massive warship that hung in space like a dark promise. He thought about all the reports he had read, all the recordings he had watched, all the assumptions he had made about primitive humanity. He realized, with a cold certainty, that the Conquered had made a terrible mistake. They had not come to integrate a young and foolish species. They had come to negotiate with something else entirely. And for the first time in 200 years, Ambassador Kethvaran did not know what to say. Admiral Yuki Tanaka had been waiting for this moment for 30 years. She stood on the bridge of the Prometheus and watched the alien diplomatic vessel through narrowed eyes. Around her, 200 crew members worked at their stations in perfect silence. They knew their jobs. They knew what was at stake. They did not need to be told. The Prometheus was more than a ship. It was a statement. It was a promise. It was humanity's answer to a galaxy that had watched them suffer and done nothing to help. "Admiral," said her communications officer, a young man named Chen, "the aliens are hailing us again. That makes 18 times now. Let them wait." Some of her officers exchanged glances. Tanaka did not care. She had read the intelligence reports. She knew exactly who these aliens were and what they wanted. She knew about the Valith Concord and their precious coalition of 12 species. She knew about their treaties and their councils and their endless debates. She also knew what they had not done. 30 years ago, when Tanaka was a young lieutenant serving on a cargo vessel, the Kethmar hegemony had attacked a human colony called Colony 7. The hegemony was not part of the Conquered, but the Conquered had known about the attack 6 hours before it happened. They had detected the hegemony fleet. They had calculated its destination. They had understood exactly what was going to happen. They had done nothing. 3 million humans had died on Colony 7. Men, women, and children had been vaporized when the hegemony ships fired their weapons from orbit. The colony's shields had held for 17 minutes. 17 minutes of hope, of desperate prayers, of frantic calls for help that were never answered. Tanaka's grandmother had been on Colony 7. She had been a teacher at a small school in the colony's agricultural sector. When the attack began, she had gathered her students in the basement and told them stories. Stories about heroes. Stories about hope. Stories about help that would surely come. The help never came. The stories ended when the hegemony's weapons burned through the basement walls. Tanaka had been 16 years old when she learned her grandmother was dead. She had cried for 3 days. Then she had stopped crying and started planning. The Prometheus had taken 40 years to build. Humanity had constructed it in secret, inside a hollowed-out asteroid far from prying alien sensors. They had used technology stolen from crashed alien vessels. They had invented technologies that the Concord believed were impossible. They had worked and sacrificed and bled for 4 decades to create something that would make the galaxy pay attention. Now the galaxy was paying attention. "Admiral," Chen said again, "the alien ambassador is requesting an immediate audience. He says his delegation has traveled a great distance and deserves the courtesy of a response." Tanaka smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Courtesy. Interesting choice of words. She thought about Colony 7. She thought about New Helsinki, another human world that had been attacked by creatures called the Ravager swarms. The Concord had debated intervention for 6 months, while humans fought and died alone. 2 million more lives lost, while aliens argued about procedure and protocol. She thought about all the times humanity had reached out to the stars and found only indifference. "Open a channel," she finally said. The view screen activated, showing the alien ambassador. He was a snake-like creature with scales that kept changing color. Tanaka recognized the species from intelligence reports. Sithani, known for their diplomatic skills and their ability to manipulate other species. His scales were currently a pale white color that meant fear. "Good. Ambassador," Tanaka said, keeping her voice flat and calm. "Welcome to Sol System. I apologize for the delay. We were conducting routine patrol operations." The ambassador's scales flickered. "Routine? A ship of this size is used for routine patrols? The Prometheus is one of many vessels in the United Earth Navy. We take the security of our space very seriously." This was not entirely true. The Prometheus was the only T-Tangent-class warship currently in service. But the ambassador did not need to know that. Not yet. "Admiral Tanaka," the ambassador said, clearly trying to regain his composure. "I am Keth Varan of the Sithani. I represent the Vilith Concord. We have come to offer humanity a tremendous opportunity, the chance to join the galactic community, to become part of something greater than yourselves." "I see. And what would this membership involve?" "The Articles of Integration are quite generous. Humanity would become a probationary member of the Concord. You would have access to galactic trade networks. You would receive technological assistance. You would be protected under Concord law." "Protected?" "Tanaka, let the word hang in the air. Tell me, Ambassador, what exactly does Concord protection look like?" Kethvoran's scales shifted to an uncertain yellow. "I do not understand the question." "Then let me be more specific." Tanaka stepped closer to the view screen. "Where was Concord protection when the hegemony attacked Colony 7? Where was Concord protection when the Ravager swarms invaded New Helsinki? Where was the great and mighty Vilith Concord when 3 million humans were dying and calling for help?" The ambassador's scales went through several colors very quickly. Those incidents were regrettable. But humanity was not a member species at the time. The Concord had no legal obligation to intervene. No legal obligation. Tanaka nodded slowly. "I understand. You had no legal obligation to save 3 million lives. You had no legal obligation to answer our calls for help. You simply chose not to. Is that correct? Admiral, you must understand. The Concord operates according to established protocols. We cannot simply intervene in every conflict. There are procedures. There are debates. There are considerations that a young species like humanity cannot possibly comprehend." "You are right, Ambassador. There are many things humanity does not comprehend." Tanaka turned to her tactical officer. "Lieutenant, please display the current status of Project Olympus." The view screen split. Half showed the ambassador's increasingly colorful face. The other half showed something else. Schematics, fleet deployments, construction schedules, 12 massive shapes in various stages of completion, scattered across hidden facilities throughout human space. "The Prometheus was our first T-Tangent-class warship," Tanaka said quietly. She was built in response to Colony 7. She was built because humanity learned a very important lesson from the Concord. What lesson? Keth Voran asked. His voice had become very small. That we cannot rely on anyone else to protect us. That the galaxy is full of species who will watch us die and do nothing. That if we want to survive, we must become strong enough to make our survival impossible to ignore. She gestured at the schematics. 12 more ships, each one identical to the Prometheus. We call them the Olympian Fleet, named after the gods of our ancient mythology. They will be completed within 5 years. Within 10 years, we will have 30 such vessels. Within 20 years, we will have 100. Keth Voran's scales had stopped changing color. They had settled on a shade that Tanaka did not recognize. Perhaps it was a color for emotions that snakes did not usually feel. This is unprecedented, the ambassador whispered. No species has ever built a fleet of this magnitude. The resources alone. Humanity is good at finding resources, ambassador. We are also good at refusing to die. Tanaka let the silence stretch for a long moment. Now, she finally said, you mentioned something about integration. Perhaps we should discuss exactly what that means. But I think you will find that the terms have changed somewhat. Windero, changed? What do you mean? I mean that humanity is no longer interested in becoming a probationary member of your Concord. We are not interested in limited voting rights or restricted military capacity. We are interested in something else entirely. What do you want? Admiral Tanaka smiled again, and this time there was something in her eyes that made Keth Voran's blood run cold. We want the galaxy to learn the lesson that humanity learned 30 years ago. We want the Concord to understand that there are things worth fighting for, things worth dying for, things worth building 12-kilometer warships for. She leaned forward. We want you to become better, Ambassador, and we are going to help you, whether you like it or not. Ambassador Keth Voran had never been afraid of another species before. In 200 years of diplomatic service, he had faced many dangers. He had negotiated with warlords who killed for pleasure. He had spoken to hive minds that viewed individual life as meaningless. He had sat across the table from beings of pure energy who could destroy planets with a thought. None of them had frightened him like the humans did. It was not the size of their ship, although the Prometheus was certainly terrifying. It was not the weapons that bristled from every surface, although those weapons could have destroyed Harmony's light 1,000 times over. It was something else. Something in the way Admiral Tanaka spoke. Something in the calm certainty of her voice. These humans were not posturing. They were not bluffing. They had built this impossible ship because they truly believed they might need to use it, and they had built 12 more because one was not enough. What kind of species thought like that? Ambassador, said the Morthkai delegate, interrupting his thoughts. What are we going to do? This changes everything. The High Assembly did not prepare us for this situation. Keth Voran looked around the meeting chamber of Harmony's light. His fellow delegates had gathered here after the communication with Admiral Tanaka ended. They were supposed to be discussing strategy. Instead, they were panicking. The Ravine delegate was pacing back and forth, his forearms waving in agitation. The energy beings were flickering between colors that indicated extreme distress. The feathered aviath had fluffed up to twice their normal size, a fear response that made them look ridiculous rather than impressive. Only Keth Voran remained calm. Or at least, he appeared calm. Inside, his thoughts were racing. We must report this to the High Assembly immediately, said the Morthkai. This changes the entire galactic balance of power. If humanity truly possesses this technology, if they possess this technology, they will use it, said another delegate. Did you not hear the Admiral? She spoke of Colony 7 as if the massacre happened yesterday. These creatures hold grudges. They remember their dead. They will want revenge. Then we must prepare defenses. We must gather our fleets. We must show these humans that the Concord is not to be threatened. Keth Voran held up a hand. The other delegates fell silent. No, he said. That is exactly the wrong approach. Ambassador, with respect, you cannot possibly suggest that we simply accept their demands. We do not even know what their demands are. That is precisely my point. Keth Voran's scales shifted to a thoughtful purple. We do not know what they want. We assumed we knew what humanity wanted because we assumed they were like every other young species. Eager for technology, desperate for protection, grateful for any crumbs the Concord might offer. He gestured at the viewport. where the massive shadow of the Prometheus still loomed. We were wrong. Humanity is not like other species. They did not wait for us to save them. They did not accept their weakness and hope for charity. They looked at the galaxy that had abandoned them and they decided to become strong enough that they would never need to be saved again. That is insane, said the Ravine delegate. The resources required to build such ships, the industrial capacity, the raw materials, it would have consumed their entire economy. And yet they did it, which tells us something very important about humanity. What does it tell us? That they would rather be poor and strong than rich and weak, that they value survival more than comfort, that when they make a decision, they commit to it completely. Kethvoran's scales darkened. These are not qualities we typically see in young species. These are qualities we see in old species, species that have survived for millions of years, species that have learned the hard lessons of the galaxy. Humanity is only 3 centuries old in space, the Morthkai pointed out. They cannot possibly have learned such lessons in so short a time. They learned them in 30 years. They learned them when Colony 7 burned, and no one came to help. They learned them when their calls for aid were answered with silence. Kethvoran looked at his fellow delegates. We taught them those lessons. The Concord taught them. And now we must deal with the consequences. A message indicator beeped. One of the crew members looked at the display and then turned to Kethvoran with wide eyes. Ambassador, the humans are inviting our delegation aboard the Prometheus. They wish to begin formal negotiations immediately. Silence fell over the chamber. It is a trap, the Ravine said. They will capture us, hold us hostage. If they wanted us dead, we would already be dead. Kethvoran replied. That ship has enough weapons to destroy a small moon. Our vessel would not even slow them down. Then why invite us aboard? Because they want something from us, something they cannot take by force. The ambassador's scales shifted to a color that indicated deep thought. They want us to change. Admiral Tanaka said as much. She wants the Concord to become better. Better how? I do not know. But I intend to find out. Kethvoran rose from his seat. His body coiled beneath him as he prepared to move. I will go to the human ship. Alone, if necessary. The rest of you may return to Concord space and report what we have seen. Ambassador, you cannot be serious. If you go alone, you will have no protection, no support, no way to escape if things go wrong. I am a diplomat. My protection is my words. My support is my understanding of other species. And as for escape, he looked at the Prometheus through the viewport. If the humans wish to keep me, I doubt an escort of 47 delegates would make any difference. The other delegates exchanged uncertain looks. Some of them clearly wanted to argue. Others looked relieved that they might be able to leave this terrifying situation behind. In the end, 3 delegates volunteered to accompany Kethvoran, the Morthkai, who was genuinely curious about human technology, an Aviath named Sreen, who claimed that her people's empathic abilities might be useful, and, surprisingly, the Ravine delegate, whose name was Torval. If we are going to negotiate with warriors, Torval said, then perhaps having a warrior present would be wise. My people respect strength. Perhaps the humans do as well. The 4 of them boarded a small shuttle and crossed the void between Harmony's Light and the Prometheus. As they approached the human vessel, Kethvoran had a chance to see it up close for the first time. It was even more terrifying than he had imagined. The hull was not simply black. It was covered in a material that seemed to drink in light. Sensors, weapon ports, and antenna arrays created a complex pattern across the surface that looked almost organic, like the scales of some vast predator. The ship seemed alive, somehow, aware, watching them approach with cold and patient interest. A hangar bay opened in the ship's side. The shuttle flew inside and landed on a platform that was larger than Harmony's Light's entire cargo deck. Humans were waiting for them. Kethvoran had seen images of humans before, but seeing them in person was different. They were smaller than he expected, standing only about 2 meters tall on average. Their bodies were soft and fragile compared to his scales or Torval's armored hide. They had no claws, no fangs, no natural weapons of any kind, and yet they stood with the confidence of apex predators. They moved with the efficiency of creatures who had nothing to fear. Their eyes tracked the alien delegation with a sharpness that made Kethvoran's scales itch. Admiral Tanaka stood at the front of the welcoming party. She wore the same simple uniform as before, She carried no visible weapons. She did not need to. "Welcome aboard the Prometheus, Ambassador," she said. "I hope your journey was comfortable." "It was. Educational," Kethvoran replied carefully. "Your ship is quite impressive. She was built for a purpose. We are very proud of her." The Admiral gestured toward a corridor. "Please follow me. We have prepared a conference room where we can discuss the future." As they walked through the ship, Kethvoran noticed many things. The corridors were wide enough for species of various sizes. The lighting could be adjusted for different visual spectrums. The signs on the walls were written in multiple languages, including several Concord scripts. The humans had prepared for alien visitors. They had anticipated this moment. "You expected us to come," he said. "We knew the Concord would make contact eventually," Admiral Tanaka replied. "We wanted to be ready. Ready for negotiation, or ready for war?" The Admiral stopped walking. She turned to face him, and Kethvoran saw something flicker in her dark eyes. Pain, perhaps, or maybe something harder. "Ambassador, humanity has been ready for war since the day we crawled out of our caves and learned to make fire. It is our nature. We fight, we struggle, we survive." She paused. "But we also hope, we dream, we believe in things beyond ourselves. That is also our nature." She started walking again. "The Prometheus was built for war. But I hope, Ambassador, that we will use her for peace instead. That depends entirely on what happens in the next few hours." They reached the conference room. The door slid open, revealing a large table surrounded by chairs of various sizes and shapes. Human diplomats were already seated on one side, their faces calm and unreadable. "Please," Admiral Tanaka said, gesturing toward the empty seats. "Sit. Let us talk about the future." Kethvoran entered the room, his scales shifting through a dozen colors as he tried to process everything he had seen and heard. For the first time in 200 years, he had no idea what was going to happen next, and for the first time in 200 years, that uncertainty felt like hope rather than fear. The conference room aboard the Prometheus was designed to make visitors uncomfortable. Kethvoran recognized the technique. The ceiling was high, but not high enough to feel spacious. The lighting was bright, but cast in a way that created subtle shadows. The table was positioned so that the alien delegation sat with their backs to the door while the humans faced it. Small details. Psychological tricks. The humans wanted their guests to feel vulnerable without understanding why. Clever creatures. The human diplomatic team consisted of 5 individuals. Admiral Tanaka sat at the center, her presence dominating the room despite her relatively small size. To her right sat a man with brown skin and a warm smile that did not reach his eyes. His name was Eduardo Vasquez, and he had introduced himself as Earth's chief negotiator. The other 3 humans remained silent. Assistants, perhaps, or observers, or something else entirely. With humans, it was difficult to tell. "Let us begin," Vasquez said. His voice was pleasant, almost friendly. "Ambassador Kethvoran, on behalf of the United Earth Government, I want to thank you for accepting our invitation. We have waited a long time for this conversation." 300 years, Kethvoran replied. "That is how long the Concord has been observing humanity." "Yes, we are aware." Vasquez's smile widened slightly. "We were aware for the last 200 of those years. Did you think your observation posts were undetected?" Kethvoran's scales flickered. The Concord's surveillance network was supposed to be invisible to primitive species. The fact that humanity had known about it, had lived under that observation for centuries without revealing their knowledge, changed everything. "You knew we were watching," the ambassador said slowly. "And you did nothing." "We did many things, Ambassador. Just not where you could see." Vasquez spread his hands on the table. "But let us talk about the future rather than the past. You came here with a treaty, Articles of Integration. I believe they are called. May I see them?" Kethvoran hesitated. The articles had been prepared for a primitive species eager for acceptance. They were insulting in their assumptions. Presenting them now seemed foolish, but refusing would be worse. He produced a data device and slid it across the table. Vasquez picked it up and studied the contents. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes hardened. "Probationary membership," he read aloud. "Limited voting rights. Restricted military capacity. Technology sharing at the discretion of the High Assembly. Humanity agrees to submit all interstellar activities for Concord approval." He looked up. This is what you offer us? The terms are standard for newly integrated species. The terms are designed to keep newly integrated species weak and dependent. Vasquez set down the device. We decline. You cannot simply decline. The Concord has protocols, procedures. You must present a formal counter-proposal through proper channels. Very well. Vasquez reached into his jacket and produced another data device. Here is our counter-proposal. Kethvoran took the device and activated it. As he read the contents, his scales went through every color in his people's emotional spectrum. The humans were not asking for minor adjustments. They were demanding a complete restructuring of Concord law. First, the Concord would formally apologize for its failure to intervene during the Colony 7 massacre and the New Helsinki siege. This apology would be broadcast across all member species and recorded in official histories. Second, the Concord would pay reparations, not in currency, but in technology transfers and development assistance for human colony worlds. Third, humanity would join the Concord not as a probationary member, but as a full voting partner, with equal rights to any existing species. Fourth, human military forces would operate independently, not under Concord command. No restrictions would be placed on human ship construction or weapons development. Fifth, the Concord Charter would be amended to require mandatory military intervention when any member species faced existential threat. No more debates, no more delays, no more watching while innocents died. Kethvoran looked up from the device. This is impossible. You are asking us to change everything. The Charter has stood for 2,000 years. The procedures you want to eliminate are the foundation of Concord stability. Your stability is built on cowardice, Admiral Tanaka said quietly. It was the first time she had spoken since the negotiation began. Your procedures exist because the Concord does not want to take risks. You do not want to make enemies. You do not want to sacrifice anything for anyone. So you watch and debate and discuss while people die. That is not fair. The Concord has prevented countless wars. Has it? Or has it simply avoided them? The Admiral leaned forward. There is a difference, Ambassador. Preventing a war means stopping the aggressor. Avoiding a war means abandoning the victim. The Concord is very good at avoidance. You avoided getting involved with Colony 7. You avoided helping New Helsinki. You avoid anything that might cost you something. Kethvoran wanted to argue. He wanted to defend his people and the institution he had served for 2 centuries. But the words would not come, because the Admiral was right. The Concord had watched humanity suffer. They had calculated the costs of intervention and decided those costs were too high. They had made a logical choice, a rational choice, a choice that preserved conquered resources and stability, and 3 million people had burned. I understand your anger, Kethvoran said carefully. I understand your desire for change, but what you are asking for is not possible. The High Assembly will never agree to these terms. The member species will not accept such dramatic alterations to the Charter. Then the member species will have to reconsider their position. Vasquez's smile had disappeared entirely. Ambassador, let me be direct with you. Humanity does not need the Concord. We have survived without you for 3 centuries. We have built ships that can match anything in your fleets. We have developed technologies that your scientists believed were impossible. He paused, letting his words sink in. We do not need your protection. We do not need your technology. We do not need your trade networks or your diplomatic recognition, or your precious voting rights. We are offering you the chance to join something better, something that actually protects its members, something worth belonging to. And, if we refuse, then humanity will continue as we have been, building ships, expanding our territory, growing stronger. Vasquez shrugged. Eventually, species threatened by aggressors will realize that the Concord will not save them. They will look for alternatives. Some of them may look toward humanity. The implication was clear. If the Concord refused to change, humanity would create a competing alliance. They would draw away dissatisfied member species. They would become a rival power, and with ships like the Prometheus, they might win. Kethvoran turned to the Morthkai delegate. The crystalline being's facets were dim, a sign of deep contemplation. He turned to Torval, the ravine warrior, who sat with arms folded and an expression of grudging respect on his face. He turned to Sreen, the Aviath empath, whose feathers had settled into a calm pattern. What do you sense from them? He asked her quietly. Sreen closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, Her voice was soft. "They are not bluffing, Ambassador. They believe everything they are saying. And more than that." She paused. "They are not doing this out of hatred. They are doing it because they genuinely want the galaxy to be better. Better for humanity, you mean? Better for everyone." Sreen looked at the human delegation with something like wonder. They lost millions of their people because no one would help them. And instead of becoming bitter and isolated, they decided to make sure it never happens to anyone else. They are building these ships not just to protect themselves, but to protect others. Kethvoran stared at the humans. At Admiral Tanaka, whose grandmother had died in a school basement telling stories to frighten children. At Vasquez, whose smile had hidden a core of steel. He thought about the Concord Charter, about the 2,000 years of careful neutrality, about all the species who had suffered and died while the Assembly debated. He thought about Colony 7. "I cannot authorize these changes," he said finally. "I do not have the authority. Only the High Assembly can amend the Charter." "We understand," Vasquez replied. "We are not asking you to make these decisions alone. We are asking you to bring our proposal to the Assembly. Let them debate it. Let them vote. And if they vote against it, then we will know where we stand." Admiral Tanaka's voice was calm, almost sad. "We hope they will make the right choice, Ambassador. We hope the Concord will choose to become something worthy of respect. But if they do not, humanity will find its own path." Kethvoran looked at the data device in his hand. Such a small thing. Such enormous implications. "I will bring your proposal to the Assembly," he said. "I will argue for its acceptance." "You will?" Vasquez seemed genuinely surprised. "Yes." The ambassador's scales settled into a deep blue, a color that meant resolve. "Because you are right. The Concord has been comfortable for too long. We have forgotten why we formed our coalition in the first place. We have forgotten that some things are worth fighting for." He rose from his seat. The other delegates rose with him. "Humanity has reminded us of what we lost. Perhaps it is time for the Concord to remember." Admiral Tanaka stood as well. For a moment, she studied the ambassador with those dark, weighted eyes. Then she extended her hand. Kethvoran looked at it. Human customs were strange, but he understood the gesture. He reached out with his own scaled appendage and clasped her hand. "I hope this is the beginning of something better," Tanaka said quietly. "So do I, Admiral. So do I." 3 years had passed since the meeting aboard the Prometheus. Ambassador Kethvoran stood on the observation deck of that same ship and watched the stars burn. Around him, alarms wailed and crew members shouted orders. The deck shook with the thunder of weapons firing. Through the transparent viewport, he could see the flashes of ships dying in the void. The Battle of Athel Prime was the largest military engagement in Concord history. It had started 3 days ago, when the Kethmar hegemony launched a surprise attack on a peaceful world. Athel Prime was home to the Melankai, a gentle species of herbivores who had never developed weapons of war. They had 800 million civilians and no significant military presence. Under the old Concord Charter, the Assembly would have debated intervention. Delegates would have argued about jurisdiction and procedure and cost. Reports would have been filed. Committees would have been formed. And while the Concord talked, the Melankai would have died. Under the new charter, things were different. Admiral Tanaka had received the distress call 14 hours after the attack began. She had immediately ordered the Prometheus to Athel Prime, along with 6 of her sister ships from the Olympian fleet. Behind them came the combined forces of 9 Concord member species, including vessels from the Sithani, the Morthkai, the Aviath, and the Ravine. For the first time in 2,000 years, the Concord was fighting together. The hegemony had not expected resistance. They had grown used to attacking Concord worlds without consequence. They had learned that the Great Coalition was toothless, more interested in preserving itself than protecting its members. They learned differently today. Kethvoran watched as a hegemony battlecruiser tried to flee the battle. It almost made it. Then a beam of brilliant white light lanced out from the Prometheus and cut the ship in half. The 2 pieces tumbled away into the darkness, spilling atmosphere and debris. "Enemy fleet integrity at 30%, reported a human officer. "They're breaking formation. Multiple ships attempting to retreat. Do not let them escape," Admiral Tanaka ordered. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "Every ship that leaves here will attack another innocent world. Stop them all." More weapons fired. More ships died. Kethvoran had seen battles before, in recordings and historical documents. He had studied military tactics as part of his diplomatic training. He thought he understood war. He had been wrong. War was not about numbers or strategies or technologies. War was about will, about the determination to keep fighting when everything seemed lost, about the courage to stand against evil even when the cost was terrible. Humanity understood war in a way that most conquered species did not. They had been fighting each other for thousands of years before they ever reached the stars. Violence was woven into their history, their culture, their very nature. But so was something else. Keth Voran remembered what Sreen had told him 3 years ago on this same ship. The humans were not fighting out of hatred or vengeance. They were fighting because they genuinely wanted the galaxy to be better. They had built their terrible warships not to conquer, but to protect. They were doing what no one had done for Colony 7. Enemy flagship is disabled, another officer reported. Their admiral is surrendering. The hegemony fleet is standing down. A ragged cheer went up from the bridge crew. Keth Voran saw humans embracing each other, laughing and crying at the same time. He saw alien officers from other species joining in, celebrating a victory that belonged to everyone. Admiral Tanaka did not celebrate. She stood at the center of her bridge, watching the dying embers of the enemy fleet. Her face was expressionless. Her eyes held that same weight that Keth Voran had seen 3 years ago. He slithered across the deck to stand beside her. "You do not seem pleased, Admiral. 8 million Melnkai died before we arrived." Her voice was quiet. 8 million lives we could not save. The hegemony had 3 days to burn and slaughter before anyone came to stop them. But you did stop them. You saved 800 million more. Yes, this time. Tanaka turned to look at him. But there will be a next time, Ambassador. There is always a next time. Somewhere in this galaxy, there is another species planning another attack. Another innocent world that will call for help. Another Colony 7 waiting to happen. And the Concord will answer that call. Because of you. Because of what humanity taught us. Tanaka was silent for a long moment. Through the viewport, Keth Voran could see the planet Aethel Prime turning slowly in the void. Its night side was dark, but its day side sparkled with the lights of cities that had nearly been extinguished forever. "My grandmother used to tell stories," the Admiral said finally. "Stories about heroes who saved the innocent. Stories about ordinary people who did extraordinary things, because it was right. She told those stories to her students in the last minutes of her life, while Colony 7 burned around her. I remember. You told me about her. She believed that help would come. She believed, until the very end, that someone would save them." Tanaka's voice cracked slightly. She was wrong. No one came for Colony 7. The galaxy watched and did nothing. And so humanity decided to become the help that never came. Yes. The Admiral straightened her shoulders. "We built the Prometheus because we needed to be strong enough that no one could hurt us again. But we use the Prometheus because we need to make sure no one hurts anyone else. That is the difference, Ambassador. That is what humanity is trying to teach the galaxy. I think we are beginning to understand." Below them, the first human relief ships were descending toward Aethel Prime. They carried food, medicine, construction equipment, and thousands of volunteers who had signed up to help rebuild a world they had never seen. Humans were strange like that. They cared about people they had never met. They fought for causes that would never benefit them directly. It made them unpredictable. It made them dangerous. It also made them wonderful. "Admiral," said a communications officer, "we are receiving a message from the Melnkai planetary government. They want to express their gratitude." "Put it through." The view screen activated, showing a Melnkai official. The creature was small and covered in soft blue fur, with large eyes that reflected the light. Those eyes were wet with tears. "Admiral Tanaka," the Melnkai said, its voice trembling. "On behalf of my people, I thank you. You came when we called. You saved us when no one else would. We will never forget this. Never." Tanaka bowed her head slightly. "The Concord protects its members. That is our purpose. That is our promise. The Concord has existed for 2,000 years. In all that time, no fleet ever came to save a world under attack. No ships ever arrived to protect the innocent." The Melnkai official paused. "You have changed everything, Admiral. You have shown us what the galaxy can be." The screen went dark. Keith Voran looked at Tanaka. The Admiral's expression had not changed, but something in her eyes was different. Softer, perhaps. More human. 3 years ago, the ambassador said. I came to your system with a treaty designed to keep humanity weak and controlled. I thought your species was primitive and foolish. I thought you needed the Concord to teach you civilization. And now? Now I understand that the Concord needed humanity to teach us something far more important. Kethvaran's scales shifted to a color that his people reserved for the most profound emotions. You taught us to care. You taught us to fight for something beyond ourselves. You taught us that some things are worth any price. We did not teach you anything, Ambassador. We only reminded you of what you had forgotten. Perhaps. Kethvaran looked out at the stars. At the Concord fleet gathered around Aethel Prime. At the human relief ships descending to help strangers. But it is a lesson we needed to learn again. And I think, perhaps, the galaxy is better for it. Admiral Tanaka smiled. It was a rare expression for her. A genuine expression. That is all we ever wanted, Ambassador. A better galaxy. A place where innocent people do not die while others watch and do nothing. A universe where help actually comes when you call for it. She turned back to the viewport. We built the Prometheus because we learned that no one would save us. We fly her to make sure we can save others. That is what humanity is. That is who we are. Kethvaran watched the lights of Aethel Prime sparkle in the darkness. He thought about Colony 7, about the children who had died listening to stories of heroes who never came. He thought about all the worlds that had suffered while the conquered debated and delayed. And he thought about the future. A future where no child would die waiting for rescue. A future where the innocent would be protected and the guilty would be punished. A future where the galaxy had finally learned to be worthy of its own potential. It was a good future, and it had started with a single ship, built in secret by a stubborn species that refused to accept that hope was foolish. Humanity, Kethvaran said softly, is the strangest species I have ever encountered. Admiral Tanaka's smile widened. We get that a lot. Outside, the stars continued to shine. The fleet held its position, and somewhere in the darkness, the Prometheus stood watch, ready to answer the next call for help, because that was what heroes did, and humanity, at last, had become the heroes their grandmother always believed in.